You ever get that feeling that everyone is looking in one direction, but the biggest story is actually happening somewhere else? That's exactly what's going on right now. With training camp finally about to begin, all the attention is on the obvious headlines, but behind the scenes there are several players fighting for much more than just playing time. Some are trying to keep their jobs, others are trying to prove they deserve a bigger role, and a few could completely change the way this team looks before Week 1 even gets here. Once you start looking a little closer, things get really interesting. There is one storyline surrounding the Minnesota Vikings that everyone expects to dominate training camp, but if you look beyond the quarterback headlines, a completely different battle is quietly taking shape. In just a matter of days, training camp will officially begin, and while most of the spotlight will naturally fall on the quarterback competition, several other players are entering one of the most important moments of their careers. Some are fighting to secure roster spots. Others are trying to prove they still deserve starting roles. And a few simply have to remind everyone why the Vikings invested so heavily in them. The countdown is almost over. Rookies are scheduled to report on July 26th. Veterans will follow on July 28th. The first back-together weekend arrives on August 1st. The first padded practice is set for August 3, and the popular night practice will take place on August 9th. For Vikings fans, that means real football is finally back. And with every practice, every rep, and every preseason snap, the coaching staff will be evaluating players whose futures could change dramatically over the next few weeks. One of the most fascinating names to watch is Tai Felton. Many fans have already assumed that Felton is a guaranteed member of the final 53-man roster, but that assumption may be far more dangerous than it appears. On paper, the Vikings possess one of the strongest wide receiver groups in football. Justin Jefferson remains the unquestioned superstar. Jordan Addison continues to be a major weapon. The addition of Jauan Jennings gives Minnesota another proven target, creating what many believe could be one of the league's best receiving trios. That immediately changes the conversation for everyone else. Earlier in the offseason, there was a realistic scenario where Tai Felton could have entered camp with a clear path toward becoming the team's third receiver after Jalen Nailor departed in free agency. Instead, Minnesota strengthened the position by bringing in Jennings, effectively pushing Felton further down the depth chart before training camp even began. Now the competition becomes much more complicated. There appear to be only 4 receivers who can truly be viewed as roster locks. Jefferson, Addison, and Jennings occupy the top of the depth chart without much debate, while Miles Price has established considerable value because of his contributions as both a kick and punt returner. That leaves the remaining receiver spots open for competition, and suddenly Tai Felton finds himself fighting for a role rather than simply developing into one. His biggest challenger could be Dillon Bell. The undrafted rookie out of Georgia has generated positive buzz throughout minicamp, and although off-season praise never guarantees regular season success, it does create legitimate competition heading into training camp. Coaches love players who continue forcing difficult roster decisions, and Bell appears determined to become exactly that type of player. For Felton, simply catching passes may not be enough. The Vikings already know who their primary receivers are expected to be. If Jennings occupies the WR3 role, opportunities on offense could become limited for everyone behind him. That means Felton's greatest opportunity to secure his place may come somewhere else entirely. Special teams. That could ultimately become the difference between making the roster and finding himself on the outside looking in. Whether serving as an elite gunner in coverage units or contributing as a kick returner, every snap in the kicking game suddenly carries enormous importance. The coaching staff isn't simply looking for talented receivers. They're searching for players who provide value across multiple phases of the game. That's exactly why Felton enters camp under significant pressure. The margin for error becomes incredibly small when your offensive opportunities are limited. Every preseason drive matters. Every special teams rep matters. Every practice against the Vikings' talented secondary matters. A single explosive play can change perception, while a few quiet weeks could allow another young player to climb past him. On the defensive side of the football, another battle deserves just as much attention. Safety Jay Ward flashed encouraging moments last season, particularly when injuries forced him into a larger role. He showed enough ability to convince many observers that he could handle meaningful defensive snaps. However, flashing potential and securing a starting role are two very different things. Brian Flores' defense heavily relies on multiple safeties. Josh Metellus is expected to remain a central figure, but the competition behind him is far from settled. Theo Jackson has already demonstrated that he can function within Flores' system, even if expectations for him last season ultimately exceeded the production he delivered. Then there is Jacoby Thomas, a player whose development during camp could dramatically reshape the entire depth chart. If Thomas quickly masters the defensive playbook and demonstrates consistency throughout camp, the battle for starting snaps becomes even more intense. Instead of simply competing with one player, Jay Ward suddenly has multiple challengers capable of earning major defensive responsibilities. This is exactly why the upcoming weeks are so critical. Training camp will not simply determine who starts in Week 1. It will reveal which players can adapt, which young talents are ready to seize unexpected opportunities, and which veterans can still justify their place on a roster with legitimate playoff ambitions. At this point, the pressure is only beginning to build. What do you think? Is Ty Felton's roster spot safer than many believe? Or will another young receiver emerge and make this one of the biggest surprises of Vikings training camp? Leave your opinion in the comments. Another player carrying enormous expectations into training camp is Christian Darrisaw, and unlike some of the younger players fighting for roster spots, his pressure has absolutely nothing to do with winning a starting job. If healthy, there is no debate. Christian Darrisaw is the Minnesota Vikings' starting left tackle. The real question is whether he can return to the dominant level that once made him one of the NFL's premier offensive linemen. The early reports coming out of OTAs and minicamp have been encouraging. Darrisaw reportedly looks much closer to the player Vikings fans remember before suffering his major knee injury. That alone is a massive development because this offense simply operates differently when he is at his best. There was a time when Darrisaw looked ready to become one of the league's elite left tackles. His performances suggested he was taking another step toward becoming one of the NFL's cornerstone offensive linemen. Last season, however, things were very different. Injuries limited him to roughly half of the team's offensive snaps, and even when he was available, he was unable to consistently play at the incredibly high standard he had previously established. Perhaps the biggest indication of how much the Vikings value Darrisaw wasn't something he did on the field. It was what the front office did during the offseason. Minnesota invested valuable resources into reinforcing the tackle position, adding depth behind Darrisaw. Rather than simply hoping their franchise left tackle would remain healthy throughout the year, the organization made sure insurance was available if injuries became an issue again. That decision speaks volumes about how important Darrisaw is to everything this offense wants to accomplish. When he was unavailable, the offense looked noticeably different. Protection changed. Game planning changed. The entire structure of the offense was affected because replacing a player of his caliber simply isn't easy. That's why, outside of the quarterback position, few players are more valuable to the Vikings than Christian Darrisaw. If someone could guarantee one non-quarterback would stay healthy for all 17 games while playing at his highest level, Darrisaw would immediately become one of the most logical answers. His ability to anchor the offensive line impacts virtually every aspect of Minnesota's offense. Then comes another intriguing storyline in the backfield. Aaron Jones enters training camp facing questions that very few veteran running backs enjoy hearing. While many still recognize his experience and versatility, there is growing belief that the Vikings' rushing attack could begin shifting toward younger talent. Jordan Mason is expected to handle the majority of the workload, and that dramatically changes Aaron Jones's role within the offense. Rather than serving as the unquestioned lead back, Jones could increasingly become the veteran presence relied upon for pass protection, receiving ability, and situational football. His experience remains valuable. His ability in blitz pickup remains valuable. His reliability catching passes out of the backfield remains valuable. But in today's NFL, younger explosive players create constant pressure on veterans, and Minnesota appears to have one waiting for his opportunity. Deont Claiborne has generated considerable excitement because of the explosiveness he brings whenever the football is in his hands. The Vikings drafted him with the expectation that he could make an impact, and if he develops quickly in the areas coaches demand, particularly pass protection, it becomes much harder to justify keeping him off the field. That is exactly where Aaron Jones finds himself under pressure. If Claiborne proves he can handle the complete responsibilities of an NFL running back, Minnesota suddenly has another dynamic option capable of changing games with explosive plays. Training camp could determine just how quickly that transition begins. The final player drawing significant attention is cornerback Isaiah Rodgers. His 2025 season presented one of the most fascinating evaluations on the entire roster because his performances varied dramatically. At his best, he looked outstanding. One game, in particular, stood above everything else. Against Cincinnati, Rodgers delivered an incredible performance that included elite coverage, impact plays, and one of the highest individual Pro Football Focus grades recorded during the season. But one spectacular game doesn't erase an entire year of evaluation. There were also performances where opposing receivers found consistent success against him, exposing areas where Rodgers struggled, particularly in physical man-to-man situations. While he showed he could function effectively in zone coverage, maintaining consistency became the larger concern. Meanwhile, the Vikings continued adding competition. The arrival of Charles Demings and James Pierre means nothing will simply be handed to Rodgers entering camp. Pierre is expected to play a major role, while Demings now has an opportunity to push for meaningful snaps if he develops quickly enough. That creates another fascinating battle to watch throughout August. Minnesota's secondary continues evolving under Brian Flores, and while the defense frequently relies on multiple defensive backs, every starting position must still be earned. Rodgers enters camp knowing that strong practices won't simply be appreciated, they'll be necessary. That's really the theme connecting every player discussed throughout this training camp preview. Some are trying to protect established roles. Some are trying to earn larger opportunities. Others are simply trying to prove they still belong among the Vikings' long-term plans. As training camp officially opens, every practice becomes another evaluation. Every preseason game becomes another opportunity. Every snap carries consequences that could shape the Vikings' roster before Week 1 even arrives. The quarterback story may dominate the national headlines, but inside Minnesota, these position battles could quietly become just as important. They will determine depth, identify emerging contributors, and perhaps reveal the next unexpected breakout player capable of helping the Vikings compete throughout the upcoming season. Now, it's your turn. Which player do you believe is facing the most pressure entering Vikings training camp? Is it Ty Felton, Jay Ward, Christian Darrisaw, Aaron Jones, or Isaiah Rodgers? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the latest Minnesota Vikings news, analysis, and exclusive updates. SKOL Vikings!